Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just got into some of the different conference races, tried to break it down as best I could. Frankly, there's going to be a lot of stuff happening over the next month. We will keep you updated with it all, but it's going to be crazy. I feel like there's about 20 teams competing for about 10 spots right about now. Notre Dame falling out would help out quite a bit, but as of right now, they're plugging right along and they're doing their thing. So, going to be interesting to watch. We will keep you updated as it unfolds, but let's get into the week 9 winners and losers because there's quite a few to go around, and there's one that I left off on here and I feel terrible about it, but I'll break it down at the end for you guys. But winners and losers from this week 9, that was a little quiet at times, not necessarily the most explosive week that we've had, and makes me think about next week, but I'll get into that tomorrow. But a number of different things I want to break down, and we'll start with the A&M boosters. They got to be feeling great right now because, man, did they take a lot of crap for firing Jimbo Fisher, giving him $78 million, pushing him out the door, and it was the right decision. I'm not arguing that at all. There was no question that at the time it was the right decision to move on from Jimbo Fisher. They had done that thing time and again. They were in year 5, felt like the exact same team. So I was not necessarily against that decision by any means. But they did have to fork over quite a bit of money, and they're going to have to continue to do that until 2031. Those checks are going to feel pretty good to write if Mike Elko is still in that building. I can promise you that. He has got to feel really, really good going right now where all that money that you're going to be spending on Jimbo Fisher over the next little bit, you are more than happy to write that check now. You are more than happy to keep him away from your program as long as Mike Elko is in that program. Because the reality is, if Mike Elko was 5-3 and having big issues across, development, and maybe the offensive line wasn't playing great and a lot of different things, it would be a little bit tougher. I would probably put them on the loser list if I had to imagine. But as of right now, they're in the driver's seat of the SEC, and I got to imagine those checks that they're writing to Jimbo Fisher feel a little bit lighter than they did about 6 months ago. But incredible weekend for the A&M Aggies, and they got to continue it going. We'll talk about that game at South Carolina tomorrow because it's a sketchy one, no doubt about that. Loser was the 2 lost teams. We just talked about it. It is going to be a nightmare to find your way into the CFP if things hold the way they are. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of chaos down the stretch, but if you watch BYU, if you watch Iowa State, if you watch Indiana right now, I don't know who's beating them. They're playing really, really good football, and I don't think there's a team in front of them that's really going to cause too many problems. But at the end of the day, definitely could thin out a little bit. But there's going to be a lot of two lost teams that are just left out. Let's say Illinois goes 10-2. They got 2 losses at Penn State and at Oregon. That's not going to get them into the playoff. And I know that sounds a little bit crazy, and it's going to be one of the reasons that the Big Ten goes in February and says, we want 16 teams and we want more automatic bids. That's part of this. They want those teams, those Illinois teams in the playoff because gives you more representation, gives a little bit more shine to a school that probably deserves it. For a year that they've played really, really good football, have fought every single week, and have taken big-time steps forward, they deserve a little bit more love. But at the end of the day, they're just going to be on the pile heap of 10-2 teams that find their way into the Sun Bowl or something like that, and it's going to be very, very weird to navigate. But at the end of the day, in the SEC alone, you could have 4 or 5 teams that are 10-2 at the end of the day. You could have Georgia, Alabama, Texas, even Texas A&M. A lot of these teams could be 10-2 at the end of the day, and there's probably only room for 1, maybe 2 of those teams, which is going to be an absolute nightmare, and you're going to make a lot of people in the South very, very mad because you got 2 losses. Let's say it's Alabama and LSU. Both those teams could end with 2 losses. Now, in this scenario, obviously Alabama has won that game, or they both have 2 losses right now, excuse me. Whoever wins that game is definitely going to be in a great position to make the CFP. Let's just say that A&M loses to Texas, and that's their only loss on the season outside of Notre Dame, who's in the playoff. And then you have a Georgia team that goes to the SEC championship with a win over Tennessee, who beat Alabama, who could be 10-2, and then you have Texas going to the SEC championship. There's no way Alabama gets in. That's 4 SEC teams that you can very easily make the argument that that is better than them, and that would be quite the thing to watch. A 10-2 Alabama team not making the CFP is not something I had on my bingo card, but very well is something that could happen the way that things are shaking out right now. This is the first time I feel like I've put just a team on the winners and losers list, but the Oregon Ducks really won this weekend. But not only because of what they did, because I thought it was remarkably impressive. We can talk about how incredible Illinois is. We can talk about how impressive it was that they were 6-1 or not. I don't necessarily care about that too much. Illinois was able to keep the games close. That was what they did really well. They didn't make mistakes. They didn't turn the ball over. They allowed you to play your game to a certain respect, but they also were able to slow it down and make things confusing and make things hard. It wasn't hard a little bit for Oregon on Saturday. They ran through people. Literally, Noah Whittington ran through a man on Saturday, and there were so many different things that Oregon did incredibly well. And then around them, you look around, and Ohio State, do we really know how good they are going forward? And Penn State, do we really know where Drew Aller is going to be going forward? And then outside of his conference, you got Texas, did not play great football this week or the past couple of weeks. They have a bye week to figure things out, but if they come out flat against Florida, you got to feel really good about you sitting above them. Alabama's all over the place. LSU's all over the place. A&M, there's still a question around that quarterback room. So there's so many different things happening around the country that are questionable, that are worrisome, that are whatever. The Oregon Ducks are not handling any of those. They're feeling really good about where they're at now. As we know in the 2024 season, things can change in a hurry. But as of right now, this Oregon Ducks team is rolling right along. They're the number one team in the country, and they very much deserve to be there. Then we got the loser. The Colorado haters are just having a tough year, man. They're in a position where they're watching Deion and Colorado not only win football games, because they're capable of winning football games in kind of gross ways, right? We've seen it before, being able to just outshoot a team, Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter just take over, and that's the end of the day. And you can still walk away from that game and say, well, they got two great players, but they're not that great of a team. You can't walk away from these games saying that anymore. Obviously, Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders are leading the way. Frankly, the fact that Shedeur Sanders isn't top 5 in most polls for the Heisman is outright insane. But that's a different conversation for a different day. But overall, I think it's one of those things that the Colorado program has changed drastically since Deion Sanders showed up. And it's not something that really needs to be said because everyone understands, but it's so hard to put into words what he has done for that community in that area of Boulder, because the reality was they did not care about football. They could care less what Colorado football was doing every single fall for a very, very long time. Really, since they left the Big 12, there was not a lot of juice around that program. There was not a lot of people that cared about that program too much. Then Deion Sanders came into town, and immediately the crowds got bigger. Immediately the buy-in got more. And in a world where you need money from the fans to succeed, buy-in is everything. So there's going to be talk at the end of the year of him leaving. I have no doubt about that. I don't think he leaves. He's been very, very steadfast in saying this is where I want to be. He's recruiting high school at a much higher level, and it's definitely something that I've talked about for a while. I think it's something he needs to do as you move forward. But at the end of the day, if you were to leave, if you were to walk up out of the doors at the end of the year, maybe go to the NFL with his son like a lot of people have said, although I don't think that's all that likely, whether he goes to another school like Florida State, I don't know. To me, it doesn't necessarily matter. What he's done in Boulder has totally changed that program forever. We can talk about how it's going to be a little bit of a downturn after he leaves, no doubt about that. But he's done things that have totally changed the way that program is going to work going forward, because those fans, regardless of it's Deion or not, they've been shown their love for Colorado football again. And that was something that needed to happen. So I don't know what happens the rest of the way. I don't know what happens with Deion after this season. I do know that he has totally changed the culture around that program, and he has totally changed the way that that program is seen around the country, which is really special. In a couple of years, it's something that I didn't think was going to be done. I'll be totally honest. I was one of those doubters at first, but really like Deion, cannot say enough about the job that he's done, and hopefully they can keep it going and shock the world possibly. And then the winner were the unforeseen undefeated teams, because this felt like a landmine week. This felt like a week where a lot of things could go wrong. You had BYU going on the road and being an underdog that I fell into the trap of UCF. Pitt had a game against Syracuse. I picked Syracuse to win that game. I thought that was going to be much closer than it was. Indiana was playing a landmine spot against Washington without their starting quarterback. They all won. They all just took care of business the way that they have all season, and it's not that I want these teams to fall off. I very much love seeing Indiana, BYU, Pitt, and a lot of these other teams succeed. it's just getting confusing. We're getting in deep into this season, and I'm having very hard time figuring out who is the best team, who is the worst team, who's the most deserving compared to the best, and we'll get into that in the top 15. I've run into a bit of a dilemma in the top 15 that could create a lot of shifting around next week, but we'll talk about that when we get there. There's a lot of different things going on around these teams. It's very weird, it's very confusing, but man, it's special. Getting to see BYU, getting to see Indiana get the love that they deserve in this season has been awesome. I could argue that they're not getting enough love, including Pitt, especially Pitt, but at the end of the day, they're winning football games, they're doing what they're supposed to do, and they're very much in the fight for a CFP spot. A loser is people looking for answers. We talked about it in the segment before, and obviously we have gotten some. The Big 12 helped us out just a little bit this past weekend. LSU going down sets up a must-win game for both Alabama and LSU in a couple of weeks, so we got some answers. The reality is we're still sitting here with a lot of things to figure out. Is Notre Dame going to be able to run the table and get into the fight? What G5 team is going to do it? Is Boise State going to stumble again and open the door for a team like Tulane or maybe even a team like Washington State all the way out there at 7-1? Are there going to be total turmoil in the Big 12 down the stretch? Or is BYU and Iowa State going to handle business, kind of pull away from everyone, be undefeated at the end of the year? So there's a lot of things going on. I remember at the beginning of the season, I made a prediction that there would be no undefeated Power 4 teams. I feel a little bit worse about that right about now. I'll be totally honest, but going back, I felt really good about that one. I didn't think there was this big gap between people, and there really isn't this big gap between people, but you look at the football that BYU is playing, you look at the football that Iowa is playing in Indiana and even Oregon up there, it's going to be really hard to knock off these teams. Now, we might get one handled with Penn State this upcoming weekend, but there's a lot of things that we're going to have to figure out the rest of the way, and there could be a couple of undefeated teams right now that in 2 weeks we've totally written off. Maybe that Pitt team just stumbles the next couple of weeks and we totally forget about them. But at the end of the day, if you're looking for answers, you're going to have to wait just a little bit longer in this college football season. Miami's fans' blood pressure has to feel great right about now because this past weekend was the first one you didn't have to suffer a mild heart attack watching your game because you were able to handle business against a vastly inferior team, which is just insane to say around this game. Just a total side point. The fact that I'm saying Florida State is the vastly inferior team to Miami is ridiculous and something that Florida State fans understand. It's ridiculous. I don't need to, pour salt into the wound. But at the end of the day, for Miami, they got the thing that they've needed the entire year and the thing that is going to set themselves up for long-term success, possibly give them a shot to win a national title. Run the football. That is what you need to be able to do. You're not going to be able to beat the Georgias, the Alabamas, the Texas of the world, or the Ohio States, the Oregons of the world if you cannot run the football. That's just a prerequisite to being able to beat these teams. We saw it against Georgia and Texas. That was the reason that Texas got totally torn to pieces. Their offensive line did not play very well. They couldn't get the run game going, and when you have a quarterback that's not necessarily the most mobile in the world, you need the run game going. So they put Quinn Ewers into really bad positions. He didn't handle it well, and that game got away from him. And it's something that could happen to Cam Ward probably deeper on in the season once they face a team that's really a big-time worry. But at the end of the day, they were able to handle things. And that's kind of the biggest thing for this Miami team the last couple of weeks is just handle your business. Get up by a little bit. Don't have to worry about any comeback or anything crazy. Run the ball to victory. And that's exactly what they did. I think I said yesterday that they had 130 yards rushing. They had 230 yards rushing. So it was a much better day on the ground than I gave them credit for. But finally, losers are the people that were burying Alabama. I'm not saying that Alabama's all the way back. In fact, we'll talk about that a little bit later in the show. But at the end of the day, this was a tough week for a lot of those people because I think they were hoping that Missouri would come in there, get a gritty win, totally bury this Alabama team, and we wouldn't have to hear about them the rest of the way. Now we get probably the marquee game of the week in a couple of weeks against LSU because it is an elimination game in Death Valley at night. So it's going to be really, really interesting to watch. Again, like Miami, they found the run game, and they're going to have to continue to find it throughout the rest of the way. LSU, you should be able to run on. Other teams on that schedule, Auburn's going to be a little bit tougher to run on. So we'll figure out a lot more about this team as we head forward. I'm still very skeptical of what they are going forward, but as of right now, you get that win in Baton Rouge, you're off running, and a lot of people are very upset because Bama still has a shot at the CFP. But we are starting to go a little bit long on some of these segments, so I'll try to speed it up just a little bit going forward. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about all the games we just didn't have a chance to get to throughout the first part of the week. Arkansas gets a dominating win over Mississippi State. Tulane gets a win over North Texas that got the slightest bit sketchy towards the end of the game. Bowling Green continues to roll with Harold Fannin and everyone around there, and then we have a huge comeback that I just cannot fathom, if I'm being totally honest. But I'll break it down right after this.